Hello, and welcome to Fighting Over the VCR. I'm Nancy.
And I'm Matthew.
And this is the second episode of our brand new podcast. Each week we are talking about movies. There was a Facebook challenge where you select 10 movies that were important to you for one reason or another. And each week we're going to be discussing one movie that appeared on each of those lists.
First of all, we'd like to thank all of our listeners who listened to our first podcast. And it was really encouraging, a lot of the comments that we got. And we're really excited to continue doing this. Don't forget you can follow us on Facebook and on Twitter and Instagram under Fighting Over the VCR. We have a YouTube channel where you can also listen to our podcast under Fighting Over the VCR. And please subscribe to that. We are on YouTube, on Apple Podcasts, and soon to be on Google Play.
Matt's going to go over his movie first, but I just want to acknowledge that the movie I'll be talking about later in the podcast is Grease 2. What movie are you going to be talking about today, Matt?
I'm going to be talking about a movie that came out in 1999. So it's not necessarily a movie that I grew up as a kid watching. It was more of a movie that kind of influenced me. Now, one thing that was about the Facebook challenge was it was movies that influenced you in some sort of way or really inspired you. And this is one that came out when I was older. You know, I was in college, and when it came out, I was really inspired by it and moved by it, and I really kind of got into the look and the feel and everything about it. And the movie is The Matrix. Now, before I get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we have a kind of a guest here. He's more of our mascot, my cat Mulder, named after Fox Mulder from the X-Files. You might hear him purr or meow. He has a lot of opinions, so
He sure does.
You know, he might want to interject and interrupt. But back to the movie. So The Matrix came out in 1999, and for those of you who are new to this podcast, we will be giving up spoilers. We're going to talk about the movies somewhat in depth about some of the details and some of the concepts of the movies, and we'll probably give away the ending or something like that. So if you have not seen The Matrix or
Grease 2.
Grease 2, yes, Grease 2.
Yes.
Okay. If you have not seen either of those movies, be prepared to have them somewhat spoiled.
Yeah.
But to give you kind of a basic idea what The Matrix is, well, what is The Matrix? That's the whole thing and, concept of the movie. Stars Keanu Reeves as Neo, who is the main character, and he is a computer engineer by day and hacker by night, and he's troubled by this question in his life of what is the Matrix. And eventually he meets a woman named Trinity, who is also a hacker, played by Carrie-Anne Moss. And then she introduces him to Morpheus, played amazingly by Lawrence Fishburne. And they offer to tell him what the Matrix is. And they can't just tell him, though. They have to show him. And then it gets kind of crazy. They take him in a car to this hotel. They give him a pill. He takes this pill. He passes out. And then all of a sudden wakes up in this liquid pod where he bursts out of the pod. And he's got all these wires and cables all hooked up to him. And then they come and they unhook him and they take him into their ship to tell him what the Matrix is. And this is where it gets kind of like goofy in a really kind of cool sense that I really like. Basically, the Matrix is a way to control human beings. Now, that sounds really far-fetched and kind of crazy, but here's the deal. Early in the 21st century, which would be about now, humans created artificial intelligence, and they probably named it like Alexa or Siri or Cortana or something like that.
Exactly.
Anyway, and over time, the machines that are using this artificial intelligence start taking over, and the humans have to start fighting back, and they decide that because all the machines are powered by solar power to black out the sky, so thinking, oh, that's going to save the human race, well, then the machines, because they're smarter than the humans, decide that the humans are a great source of energy, put them all in these pods, use them as batteries, and in order to fool them throughout their entire lives as being a battery, they create the Matrix, which is this dream world that all humans now live in. And they're plugged in through their brain with these big cables and all this kind of stuff.
Humans in what year?
It's not 1999 now. It's actually, they think, 2199.
Yeah.
They aren't really sure because they wake up and who knows how far into the future it is. So, and then the rest of the movie is how are they going to deal with the Matrix. Neo is now out of the Matrix, and one of the cool things that I really kind of thought was neat about this movie is how they interact with the Matrix. Is they get in like a little chair and they can like put a new plug back into their brain and they hack into the Matrix, and now they can interact with the Matrix, and they do this cool thing where they can like put a program into the computer and program their brain, so all of a sudden they know all these martial arts and how to fly a plane and all this kind of cool stuff. The movie goes on, and there's this plot about how Neo is the one who, Neo, and then rearrange the letters, it's one, can save all humanity. So that's the reason why Morpheus has helped drag him out of the Matrix. And he thinks that he is going to be the savior, so he's prepping him to save the human race. And then as time goes on, they go into the Matrix, and Morpheus gets kidnapped by the machine world in the Matrix, and Neo and Trinity have to go in and save him. And there's all these amazing martial arts battles and gunplay and all this cool stuff. And it's a fun sci-fi action movie that has a really great look. Some of the filmmaking in it was really groundbreaking at the time. Things that happened after, movies that came out after it have really kind of taken from what The Matrix was doing. Personally, a lot of the look and feel of this movie really kind of influenced me, because at the time I saw this movie, I was in college, I was studying art and design, and, maybe not directly, but now looking back at the work that I was doing, a lot of the artwork I was doing was really kind of influenced by a lot of things, but this movie, really kind of stands out. I was doing art projects where I was taking photographs of people with machinery kind of connected to them and stuff like that, and a lot of that kind of came from this idea of man and machine interacting, and so that was kind of like a real direct kind of connection that I had to it. The look of the movie, is kind of dark. There's a lot of elements in it, like the machines kind of look kind of H.R. Giger-esque. If you don't know who he is, he's the artist that designed the Alien and Aliens, and a lot of the artwork, or a lot of the design work from the Aliens movies were inspired by him. And this movie was made by some really interesting directors, the Wachowskis, who their previous movie Bound, which is a really good kind of small indie movie, had a lot of good visual effects in it, but that's like a really kind of small movie about two women that live in an apartment complex, and they're trying to rob one of the women's husbands, and there's some lesbian love affair and stuff like that. That's a great movie. Check that out.
And Joe Pantoliano being a bad guy because he can't escape being a bad guy.
He's been a good guy in a couple movies.
Well,
he was a good guy in The Fugitive.
He's a good guy in another movie we're going to talk about in a few weeks.
Yes, but anyway,
I really liked how they filmed rain in this movie too.
Yeah,
a lot of water and like sprinklers in buildings, and And even some of the shots where they're running up and down a stairwell, like a very tall building, so several floors of staircase, the staircase, things like that. There were some really, really interesting shots. And then, of course, any of the shots that involve buildings blowing up or glass shattering or bullet time.
Yeah, there's a lot of slow motion footage in this that is really neat, and they kind of started using that whole camera trick that and this was the first movie where you really kind of saw it prevalent, where they were using a bunch of still frame cameras in a circle around the actors that would all take like shots almost simultaneously, so they could do this kind of flip around the action kind of motion, like it was stopped.
Oh, cool.
And so anyway, that was pretty cool. I think the other thing that really kind of influenced me was just kind of the whole idea of the Matrix and all these people are under control. And when I saw this movie, I was in college and I was young and optimistic about life. and I didn't want to, be part of the Matrix or a drone in any kind of way. And then I graduated college and got a job, and all that kind of went to hell. But, that's just life. So to kind of sum up, we live in the Matrix, and we're attached to our phones all day now, and it's not that different than what was going on in 1999, and pretty soon people who have their Alexa and all that, who knows?
Well, I remember when we were growing up, because I think you were 20 when this came out.
Yes.
And I remember you having drawn on notebooks, There Is No Spoon.
Yes.
And I don't know if the spoon itself was melting or whatnot, but I remember seeing that more than once on things that you had. Mm-hmm. And when I rewatched this movie yesterday, I was so excited for that scene, because I haven't seen this movie in easily 10 years. I've probably seen this movie maybe 4 or 5 times. This movie was the first movie I saw at Union City Theater. This is the big Century Theater that we all go to all the time. It's probably where I see a majority of my movies still all these years later. But The Matrix was the first movie I ever saw there, because the theater had just opened.
That was the first kind of stadium seating big theater that had opened up in this area.
Yeah. And so I saw it when it came out, and I probably saw it a couple more times within a few years after it came out, and especially when the sequels came out, which I was looking that up again today, and I had forgotten that it was 4 years later that those sequels came out, and they both came out within 6 months of each other, which was kind of odd.
Yeah, they filmed the sequels back to back, like it was one seamless thing. They actually filmed a bunch of it at the naval base in Alameda, where if you've ever seen the sequels, which there's 2 sequels. There's The Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions, both of which they're not terrible movies. Matrix Reloaded, I actually really like. There's a lot of cool elements in that movie, a lot of different action, but there's a really long, extended freeway chase scene that was actually filmed. They built kind of a loop, like a false freeway in a loop in Alameda here in California, and they filmed it there. So that was kind of a local kind of thing that was kind of neat for us.
Yeah. Well, you were touching on this earlier, but I was just wondering how, 20-year-old Matt adapted the philosophy of the Matrix in your life back then, and does any of that still pertain now?
I mean, I think that just this kind of concept, I mean, people are listening to this on some sort of device, and we spend a lot of time kind of plugged in. I admit it, I'm on my phone way more than I probably would like to be. I should probably be spending more time doing a lot more important things in the world, but with our busy lives, it's very kind of easy to be like, I've got this job, I have a kid, I'm married, I want to just kind of disappear for, any kind of moment just so I can, breathe. And I think that is a feeling that lots of people probably have. So having a device where you can kind of go into this other world or live your online kind of social life, or there's people out there that's the escape that they have. And but for me personally, that is probably the closest thing I have to it. Now, I still really like the look and feel of this movie.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes on, I'm always just kind of in awe of just kind of how it looks. I mean, and like Keanu Reeves is, I really like him as an actor. There's a lot of movies of his that I really like, whether he is, Bill and Ted, and being in
Johnny
that,
Utah,
or being Point Break, or he did an early movie that's really good called Permanent Record.
Oh yeah,
which where he is in high school and one of his best friends commits suicide, and that's pretty, really kind of a deeper movie. And then he's in Parenthood. He was in Parenthood, and then more recently the John Wick movies. He kind of really pumped up the action in that. And I've only actually seen, admittedly, the first John Wick movie, but it's a good movie. It's a lot of fun. And it's funny though, is I actually, when I think of Keanu Reeves, I actually think about him as Neo. I mean, that kind of became kind of the iconic role for me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that you probably feel a little differently because Nancy really liked Keanu Reeves growing up. I'm pretty sure that was one of the many posters that she had on her wall.
Yeah, Point Break. I loved him from Point Break, but that shouldn't be a shock. Another thing that I've found really interesting about this movie is, maybe not right now, but maybe in even 5 or 10 more years, anyone watching this movie who, like when your son watches it in a few years, he's not going to know what a landline is. Landlines are going to seem like these very ancient inventions. And,
just for a little bit of background, one of the ways that when you're in the Matrix that they get, the characters in and out or out of the Matrix is they call a phone. Normally it's a pay phone or just a landline phone, and then whoever's in the Matrix just picks up the phone, and then they disappear out of the Matrix back into the real world.
Yeah. So the landlines looking like relics, that was, kind of a fun thought. But also, because this movie predates widespread social media that we now have.
Oh, yeah.
People can connect with strangers so easily right now. I mean, we could go online right now and connect with any number of strangers right now. No one nowadays would be surprised by a stranger contacting them and telling them to go follow the white rabbit. Like, that wouldn't shock me. I mean, I'm sure someone would think that's weird, but it wouldn't be nearly as shocking as it was to Neo. I mean, Neo, I don't know even what kind of computer program that was. I didn't recognize the language he was using in the movie, or if it was supposed to be something we were supposed to recognize.
Well, I mean, if you're thinking about the technology of 1999, I mean, you had AOL chat rooms, and I mean, it was very kind of the beginning of you had people being able to email and some of the very what seems very basic,
very rudimentary
nowadays, but back then that was really advanced. And I just think that the just the whole idea of the plugging in and or as I think they say jacking in the movie or anything like that, is definitely kind of very still relative today. And it's funny is in thinking about Keanu Reeves and the movies where he does get plugged in, there's another movie that came out before The Matrix called Johnny Mnemonic, which is not a very good movie, but it has that same dark tone and this whole kind of, and he plugs something into his head, but it still has this kind of apocalyptic feel and everything, but the effects in that movie aren't as great, and it's not that good.
Well, there was a movie that came out
It's okay.
earlier. There's a movie that came out earlier this year. I don't think you've seen it yet, but it does deal with this kind of like virtual reality that I feel like is similar to what The Matrix presents as a Ready Player One. You know, it's all these people kind of plugging into this virtual reality and playing this game. And I think it'd be interesting for you to watch that and maybe compare it to The Matrix one of these days.
Okay.
The only other thing I thought about for this, and we did touch upon it earlier, was just simply that poor Joe Pantoliano, like, he just cannot get away from being a bad guy. I mean, he
Yeah.
just to spoil this, again, we're spoiling this whole movie, but he strikes a deal with the Agent Smith, to get him out of the Matrix, to get him out of living in the real world. You know, he took the red pill. He wants to get reimplanted back into a pod or whatever he wants, and he is a huge giant traitor and kills at least 3 people in the ship, in the Nebuchadnezzar ship that they've been living on. And just in traditional stupid villain timing, he gets on the phone and he reveals his evil dark plans, and luckily, because Neo really is the one, he's saved before Cypher can pull the plug on him and kill him.
I'm really curious. You know, he does play. He's a really good actor, and he does play the villain in a lot of different parts that he plays. But you know, I don't know if he feels typecast in that, or if he likes it, or if he doesn't like it, or whether it matters to him. I'm sure he just likes doing his job. But you know, he's definitely an actor that, you know, when you see him on screen, you kind of almost suspect that he's going to turn, you know, stab someone in the back.
Yeah.
Just based on the roles that he's played. So I almost wasn't even surprised in this movie when all of a sudden he was the guy that kind of turned on everybody.
Well, he has a he doesn't have like a dark, menacing, like Darth Vader voice. Like, you know, he seems like someone that's like, oh, hey, Trinity, how's it going? Like, he just doesn't come off evil. And again, we're going to talk about him in a movie in a few weeks where he's not evil. But again, I think maybe some of his most memorable roles, he's evil, between Goonies and this movie and Bound and even in The Sopranos. Like all these
Risky Business.
Oh, he was in that too?
He was in Risky Business, he played the guy that was trying to get money from Tom Cruise.
Oh my God. See, yeah. Evil Joe Pantoliano. But anyways, there were a few things that I was able to take away from this movie and try to compare to the next movie that we're going to talk about that were some similarities, believe it or not. The movie we're going to talk about is Grease 2. You know, so the similarities between Grease 2 and The Matrix, which again are very silly and very shallow, but again, I couldn't help myself. Grease 2, of course, is reclaim the glory that was the original Grease. The original Grease came out in 1978 and Grease 2 came out in 1982. There are motorcycles. Motorcycles are a very, very important role in Grease 2. And Carrie Moss as Trinity was a total badass, and she helped shape Neo to become the man he is, which leads us to Grease 2. So Grease 2 is a period piece. It's supposed to be set in 1961, and the continuity of it being a period piece slips in and out quite a bit. But it's a musical. It opens with a very large, gotta go back to school kind of number, and you get to meet all the cast. You know, you quickly meet the fish out of water, Michael Carrington. He's played by Maxwell Caulfield. He is supposed to be Sandy's cousin from the original Grease, played by Olivia Newton-John. He falls in love with Stephanie Zanoni immediately. I mean, and who wouldn't? Stephanie Zanoni is the first strong, independent woman I ever saw in a movie. We watched this movie on HBO all the time. Stephanie Zanoni, she has a ton of agency. The movie starts with, she had just ended a relationship with Johnny Nogarelli, this horrible jerk who is in charge of the T-Birds. He's supposed to be like a Danny Zuko kind of equivalent, but nowhere near. But even though she breaks up with him and leaving, not being in a relationship with a T-Bird means that she can get kicked out of the group she's in, the Pink Ladies, she knows herself well enough not to be a trophy or to just be someone's chick. She wants something more, and in terms of the something more that she wants out of a guy, she wants a cool writer. She wants, a mystery man, a motorcycle guy or whatever. So anyways, this, Michael Carrington, he, again, immediately falls in love with her, becomes obsessed with her, and really pursues her. This is where the longer journey of the movie and very silly part of the movie kicks in. Once she reveals you need to have a motorcycle, you need to be really cool, he decides, okay, well, I'm going to become that man then. Bowling alley is a very popular social gathering area. And after he has restored a bike, learned how to ride a motorcycle, and gotten a lot of leather to wear and very mysterious goggles, and spray painted his helmet black, he shows up at the bowling alley and appears to be this really cool, badass guy. And, it's very silly because, again, how do you not know who someone is just because they've got a pair of goggles on their face? But she doesn't know. As she becomes infatuated with this mystery man, she also is becoming friends with Michael on her own. They go to school together. He's very, very smart. He's helping her with English. So they're kind of just forming a friendship on their own. And at the very end, or near the end of the movie, Stephanie thinks that, Michael has died. Like, he jumps over this giant ravine at this, like, dead man's curve or whatever. They're all sad. Everyone thinks, oh my God, he's dead. But voila, he turns up. He was the mystery man this whole time. And, he asks her, were you disappointed now to see that it's me? And he's like, no. She's like, no, are you kidding? I get 2 for the price of 1. So she has fallen for both bookworm Michael and cool writer Michael. But, I know it might seem weird to you guys. Why did I pick Grease 2 over the original Grease? Because I fully admit the original Grease is a far superior movie to Grease 2. But, I did watch this movie a lot because we had HBO and we did have this as a dub on VHS. But also, no offense, Olivia Newton-John, but Sandy is not a strong woman like Stephanie. Sandy comes off as this fragile and weak, easily bullied girl. The Pink Ladies are really mean to her, and they make a song. They have a whole song where they're picking on her. This "Look at Me, Sandra Dee" song. And there's so many scenes in the original Grease where Sandy runs off crying because Danny or somebody else hurt her feelings. And what is her big move to gain approval by the Pink Ladies and the T-Birds? It was to get sexy, wear skin-tight leather pants, and smoke at the carnival. Like, okay, that is so empowering, Sandy. Thank you so much. When Stephanie cried in Grease 2? There's one moment she cried. It's when she thinks that Michael died. Like, she thinks Michael died, and that's when she cried. She's really tough. She doesn't shed tears through the whole movie. She's really tough. She works at an auto shop. She changes people's oil and pumps gas. She's just not afraid to be herself. Like, she's not worried about fitting in. Yeah, she wants to be with her friends. There are these Pink Ladies, and there's that code, but it doesn't mean that she can live a lie. And I think because she was so firmly knew who she was, that made me, there was something about her, being a strong woman that I appreciated as a young kid watching this movie. I don't know. And again, a lot of Grease 2 isn't very memorable. There are a few songs that are very, very memorable. The Who's That Guy song, Cool Rider, probably the opening song. Grease 1 had far superior songs, I get it. But the Stephanie being so awesome. And it's like, no kidding that, Stephanie, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier, but it's no wonder that Michael fell so hard for her. Matt had to watch this movie a lot, and we, in fact, just rewatched it together last week, and It doesn't age very well. I mean, especially nowadays. It's, yeah.
Yeah. Well, my first comment is this literally was probably a movie we fought over the VCR for.
Very likely. I mean,
I'm pretty sure that at some point you wanted to watch this. I wanted to put Star Wars or something on, and we fought over the VCR.
Yeah, Mom had to break us up or something.
Rewatching this movie, there's definitely a few things about this movie that really kind of stood out. But before we get into that, I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you remember the Pink Ladies Pledge? Because I know it now, because since we rewatched it a week ago, I can't get that song out of my head.
It's to look too cool, to act cool, and to be cool. Till death do us part, think Pink.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm glad you at least have seen this movie enough to acknowledge that you would know that.
Yeah.
Because I can't get it out of my head.
Yeah. You probably can't get some of the other songs out of your head either.
Well, like, the Cool Rider song is definitely, like, if Pat Benatar was she could totally sing that song.
Yes.
I mean, that was definitely, like, a Pat Benatar style song. And then the other song that is like a really key point is Michael sings a song near the end called Charade.
Yeah.
Where he's kind of like struggling, like, I don't want to be this like mystery man. I want to just be myself, which is, a much more positive kind of outlook. I mean, I think that, I didn't even think about this, but your comparison to Sandy is actually pretty spot on. I mean, she really was kind of this very much like, oh, I just want to fall in love, and
it's not even that she wanted to fall in love.
She didn't really have a lot of empowerment at all, and whereas Michelle Pfeiffer does a great job playing Stephanie Zanoni in this. She did this movie right before Scarface, and she was really early on in her career, and she really kind of did a good job in playing this role. But this movie definitely has a lot of those kind of 80s cliche kinds of things with montages and all that kind of stuff. And on a personal level, I could really see, like, watching you grow up, especially when you were in high school. This movie, granted, when we saw this movie, we were young, like single digit young.
Yeah.
And there are themes in this movie that we should not have understood and probably didn't. And now watching it now, we're like, I can't believe I watched this movie.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole, hey, let's convince this girl to go into a bomb shelter, tell her that the world is ending, so we should have sex.
Yeah. Yeah.
Stuff like that probably is not something that a 4 and 6-year-old probably should have been watching, but it had songs in it. And at that point, when you're that young, it could have been, this movie or a Disney movie, and it wouldn't have mattered. It had songs in it.
Yeah.
But back to what I was getting at is, I remember when you were in high school, you had a leather jacket. And I was like, I was like, did Stephanie Zanoni inspire Nancy to have a leather jacket? And then at one point, she dated a guy with a motorcycle.
Yeah.
I mean, did this kind of, like, you were living out your Stephanie Zanoni fantasy for, fairly early on.
Well, I mean, I remember, after this movie, I thought, oh my God, how cool would it be if my name could be Stephanie? Or like when I had the opportunity to name pets or Cabbage Patch Kid dolls or whatever, like, I was naming them Stephanie because I liked that name so much. And, again, not to disparage the original movie whatsoever, because I love that movie. In fact, I had that leather jacket before my senior year of high school. And in my senior year of high school, we put on the production of Grease. Mm-hmm. And I got to be part of the ensemble, and I got to wear my leather motorcycle jacket, which the choir teacher thought was the coolest thing ever. But yeah, I mean, I feel like just Stephanie being a badass. She knew she had her faults. She knew she wasn't. She struggled with school, which is why she was open to having Michael helping her with her Hamlet paper. But I mean, just she she wasn't going to put up with crap. I mean, the scene at the bowling alley when, supposedly the stupid T-Birds win and, Johnny wants, some kisses from Paulette and then Stephanie. She's like, I ain't no one's trophy. And then he's like, oh, really, Miss Independent? And then she says, I'm going to kiss the next guy that walks through the door. Of course, it ends up being Michael, which then sets him on, a total spiral. But that's, she's just not going to put up with crap. And I really responded to that at a young age, and I kept that feeling for a long time.
That's good.
Yeah.
And for those of you out there that, are movie buffs, the actor who plays Michael, we never really see him in anything. And then he pops up for a brief moment in the movie Empire Records in the 90s. And, other than that, he wasn't very memorable, but I remember you, thinking that he was
the bee's knees.
The bee's knees when you were little.
Well, yeah. Well, Michael and Stephanie, they cast it so perfect because the two of them were by far the most attractive people in the entire movie. And, that's another thing. Grease 2, it's they knew to cast very, very, very attractive people for Stephanie's role and Michael's role. Everyone else,
I don't know. The other pink ladies were not that bad looking.
Okay, well, you can speak more to that than I can, but the guys were big, dumb doofuses. I mean, Adrian Zmed...
Paulette was Summer, and in their big old, season, girl of all seasons kind of thing, and she was wearing next to nothing. I mean, that was...
I know, and Johnny had a big problem with that and whatever. I just mean overall. I mean, I think in the original Grease, there were probably more people that you could look at and be like, oh, yeah, maybe I identify... that would be more my type. Grease 2,
Well, I mean, if you one of the things that really kind of stood out to me about the original Grease was it did kind of touch on some adult themes that were really kind of if you were a teenager and had to deal with this. I mean, the whole Rizzo having an abortion kind of thing, that was pretty intense. This movie, I don't think really touches on themes that important.
Not really. I mean, there's the threat of nuclear war.
Yeah.
But beyond that, yeah, not a whole lot. I mean, it was... And I do want to point out, compared to other movies in the 80s that became franchises, I'm thinking in particular of Karate Kid and Revenge of the Nerds, Grease 2 really has a significant mark that's different from the original. And it's not just because it's not as good of a movie, but it didn't follow the same exact beats thing, one thing after another. I mean, the fact that Danny and Sandy had a summer romance and fell in love over the summer and then had to deal with, oh, now we're in the same school together. That is very, very different than Michael getting a giant crush on a girl that he had to pursue the entire school year. And then the whole... American Bandstand being the big centerpiece of the first movie versus this talent show that they had to prepare for, which gave a reason for all these people to have to still talk to each other throughout the year, which sometimes I think in movies, especially where friends that maybe don't have things in common, you're kind of why are these idiots hanging out together? They don't like each other. Having this talent show they're all working towards. It's oh, okay, well, they got to spend a certain amount of hours out, extracurricular time together. Anyways, I feel like Grease 2 definitely makes its mark as a separate movie from the original. And you can watch them without ever having seen... You can watch Grease 2 without having seen the original, because that's how we did. I don't remember ever seeing the first one until after we saw
we did not.
Grease 2.
We saw Grease 2 because it was there and available, and then it was oh, there's this other movie called Grease, and then we saw that. And I think the only connecting factor is there is one character, Frenchie.
Frenchie's the same, and the gang leader on the other side, Balmuto, and a lot of the teachers are the same. The track coach and the principal and Blanche, the
assistant principal.
Those are the same, but really beyond that, there's not a lot of continuity with the characters, but that's fine.
Yeah, and this and Grease 2 definitely has more of the. It kind of takes up from in the kind of early 80s raunchy kind of comedy in a sense that, they have this whole song about reproduction that is,
so
really
silly.
uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. I mean, there's a lot of cringe-worthy moments watching this movie that I had, and to be honest, when Nancy watched this as a kid, of course I watched it because what else was on? And
it's what we did together.
It's what we did together. So, the whole premise of this show is basically the things that I got to see that I probably never would have seen if I didn't have an older sister. This was one of those movies, and I remember watching it. I remember the whole concept. This time, I do not remember what else was on the VHS tape.
Me neither.
I have no idea what was on the tape. I know we had a dub of it, and we probably wore it out.
Yeah.
It was one of those mid-'80s, early 80s, like musical kind of movies, like Footloose and all those movies that were all around at that same time, that were dealing with that same age group, that they all were probably coming out, around the same time in the theaters, and we caught on to it.
Yeah. I don't think the director of this movie ever really did a whole lot more after, though. I'm not sure if the potential failure of Grease 2 kind of marked the director's career moving forward.
Well, there's not a Grease 3.
There isn't a Grease 3. You are correct. The Grease franchise ends right there in 1961 Rydell High. Yeah. It was an experience, and it was actually really fun to revisit. I mean, simply because knowing how important it was to me growing up, and then rewatching it now, because I probably hadn't seen it in at least 10 to 15 years.
And me longer.
Oh, you much longer, probably since we were living together.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't imagine, because it wouldn't be circulating on cable anymore, and I wasn't bringing a DVD over of it anytime soon, so.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking I think we're ready to wrap it up for today, right?
I think so. Before we go, I'd like, again, to ask any listeners who possibly have connections to the brother and sister duo of John and Joan Cusack to, if you have any connections, know someone that they know, that could possibly let them know about this podcast, and that we would be interested in having them as special guests on our next podcast or a future podcast. That would be great.
No pressure.
No pressure. And again, we'd like to thank all of our listeners. Remember to follow us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, or subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and hopefully Google Play very soon.
We appreciate any feedback we get. It's been a lot of fun hearing from our premier listeners from last week. So any feedback is really appreciated.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for listening.
This has been Fighting Over the VCR.